Falwell got his start, first by, of course, supporting segregation in any case. Second, by saying that it wasn't for men of God to mix in politics, which was his
Has that been forgotten?
default position. Yeah. Totally forgotten all that, but very easily looked up. And then saying, actually, guess what? We can do this too.
So you're saying in part it was a reaction against the mobilization of conscience on the left.
Absolutely.
For people on the right to say, well, how you're the ones who are monopolizing this unfairly.
Yes. This had the following very bad consequence, which is that mainstream culture and society and our great profession gives an almost axiomatic free pass to any black politician who can put the word reverend in front of his name.
Thus, Jesse Jackson, say.
Al Sharpton, various other religious businessmen and frauds and shysters. And now an outright demagogue and paranoid nutcase who's ruined the Obama campaign.
But I take it,
that's
Christopher,
all because liberalism wasn't paying attention.
But then
and was condescending to black religiosity.
Is that because, are you saying then that the underlying problem here in part is that liberalism, secular liberalism, has in effect been afraid to speak its name and has all too willingly ceded the stage or ceded a sense of superiority to religiously based political beliefs?
That's partly what I meant to say, but I very particularly meant to say also that by resting on the laurels of the 1960s, of the heroic period of the movement, and of the apotheosis of that in the form of Dr. King's Exodus.
But Noah, my impression is you would take a different view from Christopher here, because your problem would be less with religiosity itself than with what you would say are political distortions or political exploitations of religious feeling.
Well, I'm actually skeptical of even talking about them as exploitations, because I think that in all these cases you get a sincere set of religious feelings that are connected to a political view. I mean, I think sincerity is the marker in all of these cases. What I would have said, though, in response to Christopher, is that liberals actually haven't really come to terms, even after the fact, with the role of religion in the civil rights movement. That there is actually profound discomfort among secular liberals about the fact of King's religiousness, and that is depicted, I think, in mainstream, at least secular liberal discourse, as something that can be minimized, as though it were sort of an attractive, epiphenomenal sort of superstructure layered on top of the real thing, which was the impulse to justice, which is described as something that's perfectly available to secular folks. So when you hear people trying to explain why religious discourse in the public sphere is dangerous, and then try to deal with the fact that King's discourse was profoundly religious, they say, well, it was universally accessible.
Wait,
right? Anyone could agree with it. But it's not obvious why that's so.
But if that is so, then how is it that figures like both Obama and Hillary Clinton can increasingly clothe their views in explicitly religious Christian language? There's no fear they're going to alienate secular liberals.
So I think what's happened is that the last two presidential campaigns, 2000 and 2004, convinced enough secular liberals that they'd better hold their noses and accept this kind of rhetoric. Mm-hmm. I think that's all that's happened. There's been a pragmatic accommodation.
But I think it's much worse than you say. I mean, there's been a marked tendency on a section of, I'd rather say the left than of liberals, to indulge religiosity if it suits them politically. The instance we've just been discussing is one. Liberation theology, so-called. Yeah. The Sandinista church-based communities, the alleged preference of some of the Roman Catholic Church for the poor, all of this kind of thing is given a free pass, though it's a very debased form of religiosity and piety.
But wait, what about... go ahead.
You don't have to look very far in left polemic and journalism these days to see Islamic jihadism explained as some sort of cry for help from the wretched of the earth. That's a very, very, very common leftist misreading of the Islamist challenge.
The kind of Franz Fanon view of Islamism.
Yes, it's a Fanonization of Bin Laden, yes.
I think what's already clear in the discussion so far is that the title of today's conversation, What We Believe, ought to be interpreted in an interesting way. Not what we believe about God, because that turns out not to divide people, but what we believe about people who believe. And that is, why is it that people hold beliefs? And in what way does it motivate action? So that's why the discomfort around King is not a discomfort, I don't think, about concepts and symbols. It's rather facing up to the fact that this is a powerful motivator. This is something that got people out willing to face physical danger in the name of justice. If they're willing to do that, what else are they willing to do? So it's really, for me, the more interesting question is this anthropological question that I guess probably divides the three of us. That is, why is it that people get attached? What things are possible, and what you do about that, just as a fact about human beings.
Well, so then, I mean, what you're thinking of in part, I think, is the fact that there are many noble activities that we think of that would be unimaginable without religious motivation. Is that sort of the part of the premise of what you're saying?
Well, that's right. I mean, Noah's just published this book that I think has something to teach us as well about what we were talking about with the evangelicals. What happens when you have an orthodox religious tradition that breaks down and everyone becomes a free elementary particle, theologically speaking? Not only does that change the landscape intellectually, and you see a dumbing down, but that people are motivated to do much more extreme things in every direction. So we have a stake if we assume that there's a fundamental theotropism in human beings to encourage a kind of rational orthodoxy and to treat that with respect, while at the same time resisting the forces of action that can spin out when these traditions dissolve.
Christopher, is there a fundamental theotropism in human beings?
Yes. It must be so. But it must therefore be admitted, or just as equally granted, that we now estimate, there's been some work done on this, in fact, probably not less than 10% of us don't have this, are so made that we cannot believe. It's not that we don't, or we think the arguments against are better. It's just we couldn't.
You mean it's hardwired
listening to
in some
someone
way?
talk about why they're a person of faith is white noise to us. Okay. That's Pascal addresses his pensées to the one who is so made that he cannot believe. He knew that there are such people. But I think that it seems to be quite inescapable that there's a God need in a very large number of people, and it's innate. Daniel Jennett's book, Breaking the Spell, is very good on this, and he, as you know, postulates the idea of belief in belief as being what's really going on. People think it's good if you do believe. We replicate this in our own discourse. The president and most politicians assume that if you can say of someone that he's a person of faith, that's a compliment you're paying them. Okay? This person is absolutely willing to believe important things with no evidence at all. What could be more positive? He's checked. He's checked. Vladimir Putin gets a free ride because he's wearing a crucifix when the president meets him. Still in a strong field, probably the stupidest thing the president has said.
No, is that a prejudicial account of faith on Christopher's part, or would you agree with that?
Well, I'm not going to buy into the hardwiring view, only because I just don't think we don't have the sophistication yet, I think, and whether we will is even itself an open question, to make those kind of judgments about complex social beliefs. The relationship between hardwiring and complex social beliefs is still, it's a desideratum for the people who do, cognitive science, but they're nowhere near there yet, no matter what they sometimes tell you. So I'm not going to take a crack at that. But what I will say is, it's important not to miss what someone like the president means when he says so-and-so is a person of faith. It's not, of course, the non-rational component of it precisely that they're after. They're after the idea that they think that if a person is a person of faith, he must have moral commitments that he would not violate, even if it appeared that particular circumstances guided him to violate those commitments. That's what they're getting at. They're getting at the idea of a moral commitment that would be sustained, and I'm indebted to Mark's analysis here, that would be sustained even if there were circumstances that pushed against him. It's this idea that you can't really be acting morally unless there's a really bad reason, unless there's something really pushing against you.
What was the name? You'll know this. One of you will. Probably all three of you will. And I've forgotten it. The man who wrote Protestant Catholic Jew, the famous book.
Herberg. Will Herberg.
That's right, Will Herberg. Where what it seemed to be emerging at that point, according to this very then successful book, was that the national religion of the United States was essentially ecumenicism. And President Eisenhower, commenting on the reactionist book, said, it's really important that every American should have a faith, belief in a higher, and I don't care which one it is. So it's very genial, very pluralistic, you might say very inclusive, and rather soggy, but definitely there. and refreshingly non-sectarian.
Yeah, Nelson Rockefeller used to talk about brotherhood of man, fatherhood of God, and so his religion was referred to as bomb fog.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
so
sometimes
bomb fog is now gone from the American stage.
No, his aides, sometimes fog bomb as well. Fatherhood of